Where do you fall on Aiyuk, punt returner?
I actually had this thought last night. I listened to a little bit of like Kawakami, Barrows, and Lombardi did a little
That's a
podcast.
good show.
Yeah, and they were talking about just some different roster stuff. They get kind of nerdy on it, and it was like, it's a good little refresher for my ears. I like playing the hits, and so we do. And they were kind of just talking, just some in depth. Like the punt returner was a big point of discussion.
Yeah.
And I just had the thought, like, you can't fucking play scared. Everything's about being so terrified. And I get like that too during training camp and don't play anybody. I just don't know if you can just think like that 24/7. Someone sent me a video of Deion Sanders.
John Dickinson. I watched it last night too. I was about to bring that up.
Benito Santiago. And he's on first base, right? And he steals, he gets caught. And he was leading the baseball in steals. And I was just thinking, like, can you imagine right now if like Jalen Ramsey was just leading Major League Baseball in steals? Like, and honestly, Deion was even better, obviously way better than Jalen Ramsey. But like, try to think about that. And this guy was by far probably immediately the best corner in the league, or at least really quick by year 2. He was by far the best punt returner in the league. No one back then, I would say really the last decade, it's been like, you got to take them off. Like, you just put your best fucking players. It's not high school. You don't make them go, like both ways, even though Deion played some offense. But like, if the guy has a core role on special teams, when my second year in Philly, when I was advanced scouting Harbaugh, do you know who he had on punt? Navarro Bowman played punt. Navarro Bowman.
Yep.
Chased kicks. That was the mindset.
They had all their starters.
One thing Barrows mentioned, he's like, that first Harbaugh season, a major point of difference. They were not very good on offense. They had a good run game, but they had no passing game. It was defense and special teams. So, like, Patrick Peterson, let's just think recently. Patrick Peterson, Honey Badger when he first got to Arizona. Deshaun Jackson, Tyreek Hill, they throw him back there sometimes. Odell Beckham the first 3 or 4 years in New York. Like, if he's one of your best players, and he clearly is, he's by far your most dynamic returner, just talent-wise. I think you do it. Now, it's risky, and don't get me wrong, like, you're kind of holding your breath, but do we hold our breaths way too much? Like, all my friends that are parents freak out, like, you got to walk your kid over there. When I was a kid, we just walked across the street by ourselves.
Yeah, so I agree that that's true. I agree that sometimes we do play too afraid and that we do hold our breath too much, but I don't know that means that Brandon Aiyuk should be on punt return. I tend to believe he should be, but I'll take the other side of this conversation because I do think there are two. I do think you can reasonably argue that he should not be. Because I had the same thought, not about Jalen Ramsey, but just watching Deion last night. But the other thought I had watching this clip, and it's called, it's like 5 minutes on YouTube. It's called Deion Sanders Plays Cat and Mouse with Benito Santiago. That clip ends with Benito Santiago outsmarting Deion, calling a pitch out, and throwing him out at second base. Deion got thrown out a league high 16 times that year trying to steal. Now, he stole 38. So he's still 70% success rate. But I looked it up last night.
Is that good? Is that good?
It's pretty good, especially in that day. I think now it's probably a little higher now. I don't know, but
because you wouldn't be stealing as much, right? People don't steal.
And you hit more home runs now. Although 94 guys were hitting home runs too, right? But I did watch that clip and I thought, is Deion stealing second because that's the best thing for his team right now? Or is Deion trying to steal second because he wants to steal a bag on Benito Santiago? It was awesome. Did you notice who the pitcher was, by the way?
No. Who?
Mark Gardner.
I was watching on No shit.
Former Bulldog, former Giant.
Fresno zone.
Yeah. And that I had that thought watching this. Is Deion doing – now, that Deion did it to everybody. And they throw over and they throw over and they throw over. And it was really cool. But in the end, was it worth it? Is it worth it if you're going to get thrown out 16 times to steal 38? I think the answer is probably yes on that. But in that particular, I don't remember it outs, whatever. And like Brandon Aiyuk, what we're talking about here is probably 25 returns over the course of a season, maybe 20, right? If you made him your full-time punt returner, because you could also do the thing where you just sprinkle him. But let's just say you're looking the guy that I think the league high punt returns last year in 2020 was 30. That was Hines in Indy. That was the most.
Doesn't it seem crazy? Doesn't it feel like people punt more? I guess people rotate their punt returners.
Punts out of bounds. You fair catch.
I would have guessed like 80 returns, but you're right.
Number one in the league was 30 punt returns last year, and I think you're looking at, again, he was 16 in college. I went and looked. Deshaun Jackson as a rookie had 50.
Punt
9
returns?
yards per return. 9 yards per return. His second year, they stopped kicking at half. His second year, Deshaun, was 29 returns, 15 yards per return. Deshaun was incredible that year, by the way. That was
I would say one major difference. I would say for Beckham, Honey Badger, and Deshaun, probably different than Aiyuk, is like they were elite at the punt return. Like Deshaun, that was a major thing he hung his hat on to be an elite player. Same with the Honey Badger. Same Patrick Peterson did it at LSU. Like they were easily Dante Pettis when he was coming out, even though he never did in the pros. Like that was a point of differentiation when I'm scouting him. Like this guy could be a Pro Bowl returner.
Yeah.
All those guys were listing. Brandon Aiyuk doesn't get talked about like that. He's more by default, right? If he was on a team with Deshaun Jackson, you wouldn't be like, not now, but Deshaun when he was younger, you wouldn't flip a coin. Like, let's split these two guys. Deshaun would just do it, right?
right, but Deshaun's an outlier, right? Maybe we should be talking about Brandon Aiyuk that way, based on 16 yards per return his last year at Arizona State, right?
Yeah, maybe he could be really good, but I'm just saying, like, I don't think when people were scouting him, maybe they did. Maybe I'm underselling him. I didn't watch his special teams tape at Arizona State. So maybe he is a gem at that. Maybe they think he could be a a separating factor for them. That could be, 3 or 4 times a year. Maybe he has 40, 50-yard returns, right? Huge field position.
See, you nailed it. That's what we're talking about here. I think the case to make him your punt returner is stronger than the case to not make him your punt returner. But what we're talking about here is like give or take 25 returns and give or take 12, maybe if it's going really well, 15 yards per return, maybe it's 9. So if you're getting 15 yards once a game out of nowhere because Brandon Aiyuk's back there, that's great. But is Brandon Aiyuk getting 15 yards when your other guy would have got 0, or is he getting 15 yards where your other guy would have got 7?
Well, they don't have another guy. That's part of the problem.
I mean, part of this is you just make another guy out of thin air, right?
You could go acquire a guy. That to me is the question. So, is it worth acquiring someone who can just do the role, probably at this point in time average to below, or take a guy that has a huge high upside, but he's your best receiver?
My issue is not that he might get – we talked about this a lot the other day, and I realized in retrospect that we didn't address one part of it. It's not that he's going to get blasted while he's standing back there waiting on a fair catch. It's that Brandon Aiyuk has a very small history to work with, but – some soft tissue issues to this point. We don't have 5 years of data, right?
He's injured right now.
Apparently a hamstring pops up or a groin pops up. To me, it's more about that. Now, I thought David Lombardi made a great point on Twitter. He's like, if you're going to run them on end arounds and you're going to throw slants, like you're putting them in harm's way in those situations, probably more so, right? And it's true. It's absolutely true. But
it's like I said, there's no defenseless receiver. I mean, they're technically it's a rule, but there are defenders out there. The difference with punt, you are not really looking at the people coming, right? And you really have no clue. That's why they put in the halo deal, right? Because you're running as a wide receiver ultimately, right? You can move. You're stagnant as a punt returner. I don't even think we properly give those guys enough respect. Like, it's crazy as a kick returner, but you do have blockers, and you get to running start. As a punt returner, your feet are fucking not moving, and multiple guys, I would say the average gunner speed now in the league is probably 4.45. So if either one of those two guys do not get shoved into the cooler and they beat the double team, I guess sometimes there's only one double team on the side, depending, but if you could get killed.
Yeah.
Even if that guy's not that tough of a guy, he's just speed in the body. Every year, guy in college and the pros, we see hellacious collisions on that play. Hellacious.
Look, this is why I'm saying I think your initial point of view is accurate. Like it's
where you go, wow.
But I understand not wanting to do it, and yes, 10 yards is important, 15 is important. Sometimes you're gonna get 45. Maybe you'll get a touchdown out of it. Maybe you won't.
Well,
right?
I think
not a lot of touchdowns get scored on punt return.
Well, one thing Barrows mentioned, and he's right. He's
last year there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 touchdowns in the NFL scored on punt return.
They have not been very good in the return game with Kyle Shanahan, and especially the last couple of years. And I'll defend it. like, listen, I do value special teams. I understand it, but if I had to choose, like, it's the third, right? I want to be awesome on offense, awesome on defense.
I want to be great in all phases, but especially the other two.
Yeah. So it's like
until you're in a close
sometimes
game and your kicker stinks.
I think ultimately what Barrows was saying, and he's right, is like they just lean offense defense over worrying about the returner, and that's why they're at this spot right now. Like if you truly like John Harbaugh's teams would have just factored in and maybe kept a Webster, right? Like they always had, because he's a special teams guy at heart. It's just who he is to his core. Belichick, like there's a chance that a Matt Slater type, who I swear to God is going to have the same length of a career Brady had, but if he's going to have 20 years on the Pats. He's going to
end up as like the third longest tenured NFL player ever behind Brady and Frank Gore.
It's not crazy to think about. A lot of teams, there's no chance on God's green earth that he would make it on a lot of teams. He just wouldn't. I mean, at Belichick's core, he's kind of a nerd for that shit. And I understand it, but I do think you're playing with fire a little bit. But I sometimes need to remove myself from that line of thinking and be like, you can't just be a pussy and absolutely everything you need to do. Sometimes you just got to roll, because that's what good players do. They just play. Good players play.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I just wonder how much and it's hard to know this. Like, what is the expected gain? What is the expected gain? And the expected gain doesn't have.
I think
to be
he's
that
dramatically
big to be
better than every. I think he was dramatically better than everyone they had on their the 90-man roster. Like it was clear he was those guys weren't good enough to just get kept for that alone.
Right.
Like
right.
Webb.
But what I'm saying is not
the
gain over the replacement. Just what is twice getting 2 40-yard punts worth it? It might be if those 2 punt returns happen in big games, right? It might be. It might be the field position that changes the game.
Could Richie James have just done both? Right, if he's healthy, do they just keep him just to be a punt returner and kick returner? I don't know.
The problem is he's just the significant drop off between what he showed and the other receivers they kept.
Yeah, like the other receivers. That's the thing with like Jawan Jennings and Hurd. They make sense to keep on the team just because both of them. You're basically just hoping one of them hits out of the 2 of them. That's the way I think they're looking at it, and they were just probably nervous cutting them. Who knows? They didn't want to fuck with it, and I get it, but. Do either one of those guys have value on special teams? We know they're not returners, but I'm just talking like they're not fast enough to cover kicks.
Yeah, and it's hard on a roster that we'll talk about it. You had no wiggle room with their roster. They had too many guys, which is a good
roster building. Roster building is not easy. I think a lot of fans, myself included, can get very critical on moves. It's difficult.
Well, especially when you factor in the special teams, which you have to do. Because somebody has to cover.
It's dramatically easier coming out of a training camp, I would say, like in the NBA, right? Like you're basically choosing one individual. Like, should we keep this guy or this guy? To do what? Oh, I'll be the 14th guy. He's not going to play. So it's pretty cake.